finished the university. He's like, no, I don't want to talk about it live. So we'll
Oh,
keep it for.
sorry.
No, never mind. I'll just keep it for some other time. It's fine for
Sorry,
me to talk
I was
about.
hitting the button, but
No, it's all good. It's fine for me to talk about myself, but I won't talk about other people, even if
no,
they're my
that's fine.
kids, without their explicit permission.
No, I
Um.
hear you.
Anyway, let me retweet the thing.
Hang on, it didn't go on the JavaScript Jabber Twitter, so let me get that rolling. There we go. Okay, it should be tweeted now.
let me refresh. Did you hear about all the mess with um what's their face? Twitch?
No.
So first of all, turns out that they really like platforming terrorist supporters. Like if you support Hezbollah or Hamas or the Houthis, they want you on Twitch.
Mm.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, I know that tech companies are getting way well. They have no choice but to be political because that's where the money comes from. The money comes through the Fed. Like the yeah, they have no choice but to be political because they are born of the government. They are born of the government through the Fed, through the investors. That the whole free money thing that's been happening that for the last 10 years.
Yeah, but to host like they had like this event, and uh, and they had on stage people basically ranking streamers from the good Arabs to the bad Jews on stage at an event.
Oh,
And they presented
yeah.
it that way.
Kind of, yeah, essentially
Okay.
yes.
Yeah. Yeah, it doesn't surprise me. We need the only thing that's going to solve that is profitable businesses. And so the new groundswell around DHH and the idea that you should create a business that serves customers, like the radical new idea that you should create a business where you collect money from the people you serve, that's the only thing that's going to get us out of this
Look,
tailspin.
yeah,
Mm,
free look, the free money definitely put us
yeah.
in a weird place, in the economy in a really weird place, or like the global economy in a really weird
Yes.
place. I'm not exactly sure though how one is related to the other. I agree it's something that wasn't had a lot of downsides. On the other hand, I'm not sufficiently uh, it's not my area of expertise, let's put it this way. So I don't know if and what the governments could have done differently to deal with the economic meltdown of 2008 and everything that came afterwards, and then the COVID and stuff like that. But undoubtedly, all the free money kind of warped the market.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. Well, the other thing is, and I don't know what the situation with Twitch is versus say, um, it sounds like it was at an event, and yeah, so that's a little bit different from say, they have streamers on Twitch that are saying one thing and streamers on Twitch that are saying the other thing, right?
No,
Because
but
I
they're playing fast and loose with their terms of service.
right.
Yeah.
Uh, so
That's
Yeah,
nothing new.
that's where the issue comes in, right? So um if somebody's out there and they're championing the Israeli cause, and then there's somebody on another Twitch stream that is championing, you know, the uh, the other side of things, as far as free speech goes, fine. But if they're enforcing their terms of service against one group but not the other, or if one group is specifically violating their terms of service, so say they're condoning a terrorist acts or
forget
something like that, and that's
forget
against their terms of
Israel
service, then they should
Palestine.
enforce those. But
Forget Israel Palestine.
but
If a
yeah,
popular streamer says on their stream that she's happy American soldiers have PTSD, I don't know. That's
right. Yeah, but you have to, my deal is you have to put that into the rules, right? You have to say, look, these kinds of things are against the terms of service. And if it's not in the terms of service, or it anyway, then my feeling is hey, look, we realized that our terms of service allow this and it's not okay with us. So we're amending the terms of service, and we've warned the person that is involved, and if it happens again, right? Because then they know, hey, look, if you do this,
That's
we're
not how
gonna
the tech
offplat
companies like
from
to
you.
do it. They
No,
block
they don't.
you, and then when somebody says, "Hey, there was no terms of service violation," then they just silently update the terms of service.
Right.
I am one of the
No, I
people for
agree.
which GitHub has updated their terms of service explicitly because
Oh
of me.
yeah? What did
Yeah.
you do?
It was a semi-accident. So what I was doing was I was putting my own product ads in my repository back when I had the Dapley business. So I was putting my own ads in my own repositories, but I did this in an automated way where there was a repository that I had forked that I had an open PR on, and so it ended up adding it to that PR that was kind of a recent PR that was a good one that could have gone in. Anyway, so that was just a mistake that shouldn't have gone in there, and then my account got blocked without any warning or anything, and that was So
Because it seemed as if you were what, like spamming?
yeah, because it looked like I was opening. Well, the thing was two things. One, some people didn't like that I had my own ads for my own thing in my own repositories. And two was that I accidentally added an ad to a PR. So that was the two things. And so I think that somebody reported me for having ads in my own repository, and somebody reported me for having an ad in a PR, which was not that. Again, that was a mistake because I thought that I was using the API to only clone and update my repositories, but it turned out that it updated
Wait a
some that
minute.
were not
If
mine.
if I'm building an ad software, like that's my business, okay? And I'm storing the stuff in a private repo on GitHub or even a public repo on GitHub. I'm not allowed to put like ads that maybe I use in my software in my repo.
So I put ads in the README. I put an ad in the README that was sponsored by X. Check out our product.
Hmm.
And
Okay,
it
whatever.
had a picture. So anyway, yeah, it was. I was one of. It was before the NPM advertisement stuff, which then they had to take a stance on that, and but I mean it's the same thing that happens everywhere. Every platform goes through the thing where it's like, wait a minute, no, only we are allowed to put ads on your content. You're not allowed to put ads on your content.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway, I guess we should probably start the show, no?
Yeah, sounds good.
Yep.
What's our topic today? Oh, it's
You
up
know,
there. Hotwired. Okay. Well, it
We are
wasn't in
talking
the
about
it wasn't in the calendar link. It just said Chuck.
Chuck's a good thing.
oh yeah, well, yeah, this is what I scheduled it for, so
Okay, I have no idea about any of this.
yeah, I've got to figure out why we always end up um with two, because I have it in the calendar for on the JavaScript Jabber calendar, and then I get another calendar invite on a separate calendar invite, and I've got to figure out what's going on there because a lot of this information shows up in the other one. So
Yeah.
Just to say that the tweet has the proper title in it, like Hotwire Stimulus and
yeah,
Turbo. It actually says Hotwired, but I can live with that.
that's because here I'll get us rolling, but
Oh, hey Steve.
it's
Hey Dan,
hotwired.
how's
It
vacation?
is hotwired.
Isn't it
By the way,
Hotwire?
Well, that's the
No.
travel site.
Oh well, yes, yeah, it's Hotwire. You're right. It is Hotwire. The website is hotwired.dev.
Oh,
Okay.
interesting. Did y'all see the tweet that Amy is engaged? By the way,
Yeah.
Amy
I
Knight?
did see that.
Congratulations, Amy, if you're watching this.
Right? That's
She's
exciting.
engaged in her work, you mean? Or she's like married. Oh, okay.
Engaged to be
but
married.
ring on the finger, and she's back on the ice.
Oh, really?
No, that's
Oh no,
that's
that's
an
the
old
pin
video.
tweet. Never mind.
That's the pin tweet. That's an old video.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Oh,
I
okay.
saw it
Yeah.
on Instagram and I was like, oh, nice.
Gosh, I haven't talked to her in forever.
I know.
Yeah.
Same. All right. Well, I'm gonna get us started and then I'll get us started, I guess. So hey folks, welcome back to another episode of JavaScript Jabber. This week on our panel we have Dan Shapir.
Hey, from a still warm Tel Aviv.
We also have Steve Edwards.
Hello from Oregon, where it is finally officially fall.
And AJ O'Neill.
Yo, coming at you live from now the 4th straight day of 24/7 Vertigo.
Well, that sounds fun. My mom went through something
It's
like that.
not.
She actually went to the ER, but they just told her that, yeah, she had some kind of vertigo. Anyway, I'm Charles Max Wood from Top End Devs. And this week we are talking about Hotwire, Stimulus, and Turbo. If you can't guess, this is something that I put forward, and I decided that I would just come on and talk about it myself since I use this every day, and I'm loving it. So anyway, I'm kind of curious. Have you guys heard much about Hotwire, or Stimulus, or Turbo?
Well, yeah, I use it to find plane tickets all the time.
Hotel.
I've kind of heard about it. I know that it's big in the Rails world where I am not present. I know that it's kind of like HTMX in a way, but that's
Turbo
more or
is,
less
yeah.
that's more or less all that I know about it.
Yeah.
It
So,
looks like they all go together. I'm looking at the webpage.
you can use them together. You don't have to. So I'll give a little bit of history on this. So David, I always call him David. Everybody else calls him DHH, and I don't know why. But anyway, so DHH, way back in the day, he created a system for JavaScript for Rails apps called TurboLinks. And effectively what it did was it would reload. Initially, I think it just reloaded the body of the page. So if you clicked a link, then TurboLinks would intercept the click, and then it would load just the body of the page or just certain sections of the page so that it would load faster, right? Because it didn't have to re-render the entire page. Turbo's kind of the successor to that. And it does
Just
a whole lot more.
before we go into the successor, I want to better understand that aspect. So basically, it did an HTTP request to the backend, presumably with a slightly different header, and then it would get the response back. Would it be like HTMX? Would it be like basically HTML in the response?
It was HTML in the results.
And then it would basically do in like
a diff,
like an inner HTML equal whatever the response was, or something along the lines.
Yeah, basically, and I don't know all the internals on that, but yeah, basically that's what it would do.
And I assume that it would also like work with the history API so that back and forward would work properly.
Yep.
So it's
exactly.
just similar to HTMX in the sense that it was a mechanism that allowed you to replace portions of the page rather than the page in its entirety.
Right. But TurboLinks, when it was out, was kind of a blunt tool. And so you couldn't target specific areas of your app or specific DOM elements. It was literally just the whole page. And so it would effectively figure out what changed and then just update the changes. But it would get the HTML from the back end, as opposed to, I guess, some of the shadow DOM stuff that we see in JavaScript where,
No, not shadow DOM, virtual DOM.
Or virtual DOM, where it manipulates, it calculates and then manipulates the DOM. And
Yeah,
this
Shadow
will
Dome
get
is also a thing, but it's a different thing.
yeah, fair enough. But anyway, so that's generally the idea behind TurboLinks, and it sped up rendering on Rails apps in particular, and that's almost exclusively where it was used. And then we started to see this proliferation of other frameworks.
Again, a question before you move on. You said that it was mostly used in the Rails world, and I assume DHH created it for Rails. For
Yes.
those who don't know, DHH also created Rails.
Yes.
But was there anything specific in the technology that kind of precluded it from being used
No.
with other backend systems? Like, I don't know, PHP,
No.
whatever.
There
So
was
in other
nothing
words, if someone uses it without Ruby, you could say that they went off the rails.
Yep. You could
That's
take
a good one.
TurboLinks off the rails. Yes. Yeah. So in more recent applications, they moved to Turbo, and so Turbo does more what you're thinking of with HTMX, right? Where you can target specific areas of your app, and you can replace items, you can delete items. Turbo has a number of different pieces to it. And this is probably, I don't know, I guess Stimulus is probably interesting to more traditional folks as well. But Turbo has 4 pieces to it. We're not going to talk about Turbo Native because Turbo Native is effectively a wrapper around your web app that you can use to deploy and put up native iOS and Android apps, right? And so it's a completely different technology from the other.
So it's basically a way for me, again, without, we won't discuss in detail, but just to generally understand, it's a way to implement a native app using a web component, essentially with the Rails backend driving the system.
You can use any website. It just wraps around the website. And so it turns your website into your web app or into your native app. And so it's just a native shell that loads without the Chrome, your browser, or a browser with your web application in it.
Cool.
And it has a bit more to it, so you can provide some native functionality to it, but it's fairly limited. And anyway, if you want to just keep the same experience across your web and native apps, it's actually a pretty good option. And it does, like I said, have some tie-ins to native things that make it kind of a nice seamless experience. It's definitely not the right solution for everybody, but anyway, I'm still learning about Turbo Native, so I'm not using it myself. But the other 3 elements of Turbo are Turbo Drive. And what Turbo Drive does is essentially what we talked about with TurboLinks, right? And so if you have a link and you've loaded Turbo into your web page and you click the link, then it will go and it will retrieve the page, the new page from the server, and it'll bring it back, and then it'll diff it against what's already there, and it'll only change the pieces that have actually changed.
I'm kind of curious about this diffing mechanism. Like, how sophisticated is it? I mean, all of the VDOM kind of exists to do all this sorts of a diffing. So like any parts that of the page that haven't changed would not be touched, or how
Yeah,
does it
basically.
reconcile? How does it, the reconciliation is the challenge, especially if you've got
Yeah.
sophisticated pages.
Yeah, it uses another library. I think it's called Idiomorph. And so Idiomorph is what does a lot of the changes under the hood for Turbo.
But basically, it retrieves the new version, but does diffing in order to not replace stuff that hasn't changed.
Right. So let's say you have like a menu bar all along the top or down the side. Maybe you're clicking a link and it only changes one small part of the page. When it does the end run to the back end, and when you click the link, it may give back the HTML for the entire page. But Idiomorph is smart enough to look at the two and say, I need to merge these, right? And get the stuff from the new page into the old page. And so when you do that, it just replaces that one piece of the page instead of re-rendering the entire page.
No, I'm not. Obviously, I'm not familiar with it because I'm basically learning about it from you
Right.
right now. But there are like three big advantages to this type of an approach. One is, of course, that you avoid unnecessary flashing. Like you said, if you've got the menu on the side and the menu at the top, if they haven't changed, you don't want them re-rendered. You just want them to stay where they
Right.
are, and stay put, and avoid the flash of them being erased and then re-rendered. Another advantage is that if you've got various form elements that you've already put stuff in as a user, you don't want them reloading and losing their content. So, for example, if you type something into a text box, if the text box re-renders, then effectively it can lose whatever was in it if you've not taken special
Right.
steps for preserving that stuff. So again, if you avoid re-rendering that makes it easier, not losing the contents of form data just because, I don't know, you updated some counter on at the top of the page or whatever. And another reason is to avoid videos from jumping to the start. If you reload the video element, the video will go back to the beginning, and which is often not what you want if the effect that you want to create is the user just staying where they are.
Yeah. There are a couple of other things. One is your scroll position.
Hmm. Although
So
browsers can kind of handle it, but yeah.
but if you click to the next page, a lot of times it'll take you to the top of that next page. And in this case, it doesn't, because all it does is, again, it just merges the page in where you want. I could see where maybe you don't want that all the time, but it's a pretty nice feature. And I think that was the only other benefit that you didn't bring up, but essentially that's how that goes together. And anyway, it's pretty nice. It's I found that it has sped up the rendering and work on my web pages where I use it. And you just install Turbo and it just kind of does its thing. Now that it does have an API, so you can tell it how you want it to operate, but for the most part, it just is kind of an automatic thing.
So a few questions about it. Again, as somebody who's really not so familiar with the technology, and it kind of it's related to some concerns that I had when we spoke with Carson about HTMX. Is how it works with the browser's history, like when you back and forward, how smart it is. Is it about things? How well does it work with the address bar, which kind of goes together with the history? And also, how well does it work with browser caching?
Yeah, honestly, I haven't had any problems with the history back and forward with that. Now we get into turbo frames and turbo streams. Yeah, that's a little bit different. But with turbo drive itself, I haven't had any issues. So, and in Rails, nearly every page loads using turbo drive. Once you click a link, and so that's worked pretty seamlessly. And I do weird stuff in Rails sometimes, and it all seems to work. So
Kind of curious.
for that,
Why is it called? Kind of curious. Why is it called Turbo Drive? Like, is it the drive related to turbo, the fact that it drives faster, or it's somehow related to
I have no idea.
this drive or something?
DHH is a race car driver.
Okay. Oh, okay.
He is,
Okay.
but yeah, I don't know. I don't know why they called it turbo drive.
I thought the PHP guys were supposed to have the Lambos.
Well, Lambos,
right.
there's a lot of join a Lambo group. There's a lot of problems with Lambos.
Not.
They're pretty.
Let's put it this way: it's probably not the sort of problems that I need to contend with.
So you probably shouldn't get a
That's
Lambo,
a
even when
problem.
you can afford
A
one.
Lambo is a problem I would like to have.
Okay.
I don't want that problem.
For me cars are mostly ways to get from point A to point B.
So I'm going to jump in here real quick, and obviously you guys are talking about Taylor Otwell and his orange Lambo. But being a devoted Inertia JS fanboy, as been well documented here, I'm going to say a lot of this is very similar. I think it's maybe the same thing with just slightly different implementations in terms of what I see in Inertia and what I use in Inertia on a regular basis, in terms of only loading certain parts of the page, being able to make a query and get specific information, preventing or controlling where the page rolls to after a change is updated, just the general speed of it in terms of how that it works. So it's just from listening to Chuck and to reading through the documentation, it's sort of just a different implementation of the same idea.
I'm really not surprised that there's a
Yeah.
sort of a convergent evolution. I mean, if you want to drive
Yeah.
more dynamic web pages and a more dynamic experience for web users, but don't want to build like React application on the front end,
Mhm.
they kind of all pushes you in the same direction, I guess.
Yeah, and that's where a lot of this came out of, both with Stimulus and Turbo. Is yeah, the feeling is in a lot of communities that I talk to outside of this one, where people generally embrace React, is that we don't necessarily need a framework that takes over the entire page. We don't need we don't need the heavy-handed approach that React has. DHH calls them JavaScript sprinkles, right? So you just put in what you need where you need it. And I have to admit, I really like that approach as far as it goes. And so you look at the way that we used to build things with, say, jQuery, right? And so you would have a jQuery plugin, you would tell it to act or react on a specific DOM element, and so you would get what you wanted where you wanted it, and that would kind of be the entire story. And so it's not necessarily an approach that is unfamiliar to people, at least in principle, but a lot of the ideas behind how it's put together and why it works the way it works are definitely not new.
Is it also like HTMX driven by attributes that you put on the HTML elements?
Yes.
Yes.
Stimulus much more than Turbo, but yes.
Yeah, you can see it on the very front page of the Stimulus docs.
So what is Stimulus versus Turbo, or are you still talking about Turbo?
I still wanted to cover a couple more things with Turbo. So
Oh,
Turbo has a
okay.
couple of other features. Again, if you're familiar with HTMX, these are going to sound fairly familiar. So one other thing you can do with Turbo is you can break your page up into Turbo frames. And so the different Turbo frames are effectively DOM elements in your application that you can target for specific things. And typically what you do is you use them in conjunction with Turbo Streams, and Turbo Stream is where you send the request back to the server with a specific header saying this is a Turbo Stream, and then the Turbo Stream responds with new Turbo frames that either say delete this element, or replace the contents of this element, or there are a whole bunch of different ones that you can do that have different actions. So replace, update, append, prepend. You can add something before, you can add something after, you can just tell it to refresh the turbo frame.
So these are kind of like iframes in a logical sense, that they represent parts of the page that update separately, but they're not implemented, I would guess, as actual iframes.
No, they're not.
Rather, they're just DOM placeholders, I guess, that you can update the content of in various different ways.
Right. So, for example, if I filled in a form and when it did the post, it sent the post as a turbo stream instead of an the return header. It's saying give me a turbo stream back instead of an HTML header or an HTML page. What you would get back is you would get back a series of turbo frames in your turbo stream, and the turbo frames might say replace the user's name turbo frame with the new name, and replace the user's avatar turbo frame, right? You put a turbo frame around that, and so you can tell it to replace all of those or update all of those. And or if you're using turbo streams for comments, right? You have a turbo frame around your series of comments, and then when you submit the comment form, instead of making an end run to the server and getting back a full new page with the comment added, it just sends back the HTML snippet with the comment, and it's inside of a turbo frame that says append this to the comments element or to the comments turbo frame.
Now, again, obviously, I'm not really familiar with it as I've never used it, and I'm mostly learning about it listening to you right now. But it does seem on the face of it that it would be a good candidate to use in conjunction with the web components. I don't know if that's maybe what they're doing or not. If they're not, maybe it's something to consider, because that would really create a strong separation between the various turbo frames. Like, for example, thanks to the shadow DOM, it would mean that CSS from one would not impact the other unless you specifically want to, and stuff like that. It would create an interesting, like, clean separation between the various frames. But again, I'm just saying this as a thought that occurs to me off the top of my head. By the
Yeah,
way,
and
I
I
don't
don't.
know if, just as an aside, and we won't go there, but there's been all this brouhaha about web components all over again. So, you know,
We were
if you,
due.
yeah, we were due. Ryan Carniato, a friend of the show, wrote scathing commentary about it, and it got all the brouhaha started all over again. Anyway,
Yeah,
sorry, that's an
I
aside.
honestly I haven't looked at the code base for Turbo, so I don't know if they're using web components or not. But yeah, you do put in a turbo frame tag. And
That's
when
an
you
interesting.
respond,
Yeah, sorry, go on. I
when you
apologize.
respond again, you respond with the turbo frame tag. So
Mm. That's an interesting difference from HTMX, where Carson Gross kind of intentionally did not create special elements as targets, and rather made it possible to use any DOM element as a target for updates.
yeah,
So it's an interesting distinction between the turbo drive philosophy and HTMX.
yep. I believe you can work around things without the frame, but it's much easier to just go with the frames. That's how it's designed to work.
Hmm.
But yeah, I mean that's effectively the ins and outs of Turbo. And so yeah, I gave some examples. I've updated menus and menu items. I've updated, other thing. I mean, one place that I've used it is I've loaded a modal, and so effectively used stimulus with Turbo to update the modal contents, and then use stimulus to make it appear.
So again, now can you now explain what stimulus is?
Right. So stimulus is it's a model view controller approach to HTML or to manipulating your DOM. And so effectively the way that it works is you assign a controller to a section of your code. So, usually what you'll see is you'll see a div that's placed around the area that you want your controller to work on. And then you can define, there are a number of different elements you can use within stimulus to make a lot of this work. So the kind of the big ones are actions and targets.
Hmm.
And what you do is you have data. You use a data element, so data dash whatever, right? So let's say your controller is you want a drop down menu, so you have a drop down menu controller. So on your menu where you have the drop down menu, you would have a data dash controller attribute, and you would assign it menu dash drop down, right? And so that tells it this area is all operating under a single instance of the menu drop down controller. And then from there you can assign actions, and that's usually on links and buttons, where if you click it, you can also put it on other elements. So you can have it on forms, you can have them actions on all kinds of other things. And so what you have there is then you have a data dash action element. And
So it's kind of like it sounds kind of like an Angular style templating approach to doing things, but instead of creating your own templating language on top of the HTML syntax, you're just making do mostly with HTML standard data elements, data
yeah,
attributes.
basically. So then the targets are effectively you're telling the controller you need to know where this DOM element is, right? And so then in the action, you tell it on a click, call this function in your controller.
And the function is what? Is it JavaScript on the front
It's
end? Is it
JavaScript. Yep,
Ruby
it's
on the
JavaScript
back
on the
end?
front end. It's JavaScript on the front end. So all the
So
stimulus controllers are written in JavaScript.
it's again, I'm not familiar with it, so I'm kind of guessing. It sounds a little bit like in sort of Angular light in a sense.
I guess in some ways you could look at it that way. I think it has more in common with Angular JS or Angular 1 than Angular 2. But it has a lot of those ideas in the sense that you put the directives and the elements into your HTML, and then Stimulus is able to pick it up when the page loads and it initializes.
I see that it's specifically called a modest JavaScript framework.
Yeah.
So for the HTML you already have. So basically, it's a
Yes.
way to add a framework light on top of the static HTML you already
Mm-hmm.
have by sprinkling in some data attributes and adding some JavaScript business logic, I guess you could call it.
Yeah, effectively.
Chuck, are you familiar with Alpine JS?
I have not looked into it as much as I would like, but
okay. So AJ, you remember when we interviewed? It's been a couple of years where we talked to the guy from Alpine JS. I'm brain farting on his name right now. Starts with a C, but it's sort of the same thing where he uses data attributes and you just sort of sprinkle a little bit within your HTML to add functionality, some JavaScript functionality to your forms without having to take over the whole thing with a Vue or React or Angular, template structure.
Was it Caleb?
Huh?
Was it Caleb?
Yeah, Caleb Porzio.
Yeah.
It's not by any means the only sort of modest, I like the word modest, JavaScript framework. And I wouldn't be shocked if some of the other ones work in similar ways. But again, it was this idea that and Angular does this too. I think React does it to a larger degree. I'm not sure where Vue fits in on the spectrum, but if you declare an Angular component to work on a particular part of the DOM, it tends to sort of take over that part of the DOM. And Stimulus, in contrast, simply reacts to whatever the HTML is. So the state of the Stimulus controller, if you inspect the HTML on the page, you can see the state of the stimulus
Yeah,
control.
so the state, yeah, it's done before. It's been done before. Some, obviously, one place you put state is in data
Hmm.
attributes. Another place you can put state is in comments. I guess this one, and another option is to create JSON embeds within the HTML, but then you kind of lose the association
Hmm.
with particular elements on the page. Um,
Yeah, and
the only real downside of doing that is effectively everything gets serialized into strings.
yeah, essentially yes. Um, so if it's manipulating, say, a form, then yeah, I mean, it may be pulling values out of the form, or it may have value attributes um, on some of the elements, right? And that's all done with data elements. And then, like I said, you have the targets, and the targets are basically just elements that you're probably going to wind up manipulating within your controller.
From what I gather, the main motivation for stimulus is that if you just use turbo, then everything becomes a round trip to the back end. And sometimes that's just, you can't do that in
Right.
terms of responsiveness or some sophisticated types of interactions. And
That,
then you do need some JavaScript on the client side for more fine-grained control.
yes, I would add that there are some things that are strictly DOM manipulations that don't require a backend run. Like if you're managing data and stuff like that, and you can make HTML calls to the back end and then manipulate the DOM. In fact, I've seen people do essentially what Turbo does with stimulus, where they go call the back end and then they come back and they replace parts of the.
Yeah,
Um,
but then
but
why?
Turbo does that, and Turbo does it better.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
So, typically those people just weren't aware that Turbo had the capability, right? It's like,
Mm,
okay, I'm going to select an element here and I want the next subset. I select a country and I want the states or provinces or regions to show up in the next thing. Turbo's terrific for that, right? But let's say you want you want that element to appear as well. You can use Turbo to insert it into the page, or you can use stimulus to make it visible, depending on which way you want to approach it.
Now, again, looking at the really simple example on the stimulus website, I see that the name of the file actually specifies the name of the quote unquote
Yes,
component.
of the controller. Yes. Yep. So
Okay.
if you call it menu dash drop down dash controller,
Mm,
or menu underscore drop down underscore controller, either one, then it's going to be the menu dash drop down controller, and that's what you're going to put in your HTML.
okay, cool. And rather than rely on the standard DOM events, it a mechanism. It again, well, basically all the frameworks are kind of going this way, but it uses a click arrow, the name of the
Yes.
controller, for example. So okay.
Yeah, and so it has for the different elements. If you look in the documentation, it's there, but you can click. There's a toggle for like a details element. If you have an input, you can put an input element on it, right? And so you can use it to do things um, like a search, where you're typing in and it does the lookup and then gives you the options that it found when it searched, right? So it may do a run to the back end on that as you're typing.
Mm.
That's an input event, submit event on a form, change event on a select. But yeah, you you do the name of the event and then an arrow, and then it's controller, hash number sign, and then
Yeah.
the method.
I'm kind of
Um,
curious why you chose hash rather than
that
dot.
I'm assuming that's straight out of Rails. That's the way that Rails and Ruby
Hmm.
specifies. Hey, this is a call on this method of this class.
Okay, yeah. By the way,
You can
would you
also do
actually?
keyboard events, right? So you can tell
Okay.
it if you hit escape or enter or type a letter or type a number. Um, you can have it react to those kinds of events as well.
Interesting. I'm. Would you actually put any data in the controller object itself, or all the data should reside on the elements in the HTML?
So so stimulus doesn't really give you a good mechanism to store any of the data in the controller object itself. And so that's where a model or a value data attribute comes in. And so you would actually store any of those. So most of the time it's going to be in some attribute on your HTML anyway. But let's
Hmm.
say that you want some specific value for kind of a global setting within your controller. You would set that up on your DOM element. And so often you put those on, so you have the div and then you have the data dash controller attribute. And then after that, you have the data dash, whatever the controller name is, dash value attribute for kind of that global setting. And you can manipulate that if you would like. Um, you can also do all kinds of other things with it, and those values actually support a number of things. You can have arrays, booleans, numbers, objects, which are basically JSON objects,
Yeah, but
and strings.
I guess that really it's mostly for local transient state anyway. Like
Yes,
if you've got like more persistent state, that would reside
you're going to push that to the
within,
back end.
yeah, within Rails, obviously.
Yeah, or whatever else, right? Stimulus and Turbo are both completely independent of Rails.
But
I
again, I
mean,
assume they're mostly used in the Rails community.
probably.
Yeah.
Probably.
Again, looking at the page, I'm actually I actually don't see the word Rails on the Stimulus website, so a homepage at least. So yeah, it's meant to be like, it might be used in conjunction with, but it's meant to be independent.
Yeah,
And Hotwired is like what
that's kind
the
of the wrapper around the whole.
the
Yeah.
overall term. Is it an actual technology or just like a moniker?
From what I understand, it's just a moniker. There's nothing that's independently part of Hotwire that's not part of Turbo Stimulus or Turbo Native.
Okay, cool, got it. And you've been using it extensively, I assume.
Yeah, I've been using it quite a bit. It's a really, really convenient way to write applications that I guess, for one, you don't want the heavy-handed approach that you get from, say, a React. And it's also a really convenient way to write your applications if you just want really clean and quick ways to manipulate the DOM.
So in other words, this is sort of like where if you want to have a statically generated site for the most part and just sprinkle a little bit of functionality on the top of it, then you can do that. So you get your speed and your pre-rendering with the minimal functionality that you need.
Yeah, basically. So, and again, DHH calls it JavaScript sprinkles. So, and that's the idea, right? So you just sprinkle in what you need where you need it, and you don't have this big app managing a whole bunch of state and other things.
Yeah. Very often when I see significant state management on the front end, I mean, sometimes it's inescapable, but very often it's just wrong.
Yeah. Well, I think in a lot of cases, what you see people that basically say, hey, look, I've worked at 4 different companies. They all had significant state that they had to manage on the front end, or they felt like they had to manage on the front end. I'm not convinced that you necessarily have to do that, but anyway, so what they do is when they basically adopt the same stack and use the same approaches, and maybe you don't need that. Maybe you just need a tiny bit of state management or no state management, and you can find other ways to work around it. It
Basically, if you're building dashboards, then like sophisticated interactive dashboards, then you probably can't escape the need.
Mhm.
Like it's an app that happens to be running on the web.
Right.
And then you can't really get away from the need for a sophisticated front end. Again, if you're building like an editor for something, also the same. For most other things, like if it's, for example, an e-commerce website, more often than not, you're going to need to do a lot of your state management on the back end anyway for
Mhm.
persistence sake. So why not push as much as you can there and avoid doing it on both sides as much as you can?
Yeah, I would also push back just a little bit on the idea of maybe an editor or a dashboard. I've seen plenty of that kind of a thing done with an Alpine or a Stimulus, where you pull in some third party library like a Chart.js or something, and then let it do a lot of that stuff. And so, and then if you're building it on your own, the other thing is you can set up how each of the elements um, react to the different things you do, right? So you can control what happens when you hover or things like that, and then effectively, you use something like Stimulus if you need some kind of animation or something like that, you can trigger that. And so, like some of the things I've got or that I've built. So again, going back to the idea of a menu with drop down, sub menus. I just used a transition animation library, and I just called it in my Stimulus controller. And so it did a lot of that stuff. And so I think there are ways to do this that without it being onerous, that you could do it without having to have kind of the full level data control stuff that a lot of times you reach for in a React app. But that said, I mean, if that's a technology you're familiar with and you're comfortable doing it, I'm not telling you you're doing it wrong. But if you're trying to find an
Alex
approach,
Russell would be telling you that you're doing it wrong.
my point is that there are other ways to do it, and in this case, in my experience at least, there's a lot less overhead to doing it this way as opposed to doing it the other way.
Another interesting thing in this context is a lot of developers may not be aware, but HTML and CSS are getting a lot of features that
Yes.
make it possible to build quite sophisticated user interfaces without a sophisticated framework. Like if you
Mhm.
want pop-ups, pull-down menus, uh, right-click menus, etc., all these things which used to require fairly sophisticated coding can now be achieved fairly cleanly with HTML, CSS, and minimal JavaScript.
Mhm.
And that's especially attractive in the context of uh, a minimal framework like Stimulus.
Yeah, and that's kind of the approach that um that I've been hitting, right? And so the library, so again, kind of that transition where you bring the menu in and things. Um I mean, effectively what I'm doing is I'm using a library that uses CSS classes and just swaps the classes out, right? And so
You
it
should
isn't.
definitely be looking at pop-ups on the
Yeah.
MDN. Read about it.
I'll have to check that out. Yeah.
A lot of the more sophisticated, so that could provide a lot of the sophisticated user interface capabilities that you would like
Mhm.
to implement with minimal JavaScript. Like, and it works across quite a number of browsers. I need to check compatibility with Safari, etc., but overall it's pretty well supported. And another one that's really interesting in this context is the View Transitions API,
Mhm.
making it possible to create sophisticated animations when transitioning between things.
Yeah.
between states.
We should do an episode on those.
We
Anyway.
actually did on a couple of them. We had we had Noam Rosenthal to talk about the view transitions, for example.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, you talk about stuff that's in HTML that used to require a lot of stuff. There's my inertia site that I work on quite a bit has a bunch of date fields, and it used to be you had your date pickers you had to import from various JavaScript
Oh
libraries.
yeah.
I just used the native HTML ones.
Yeah,
Works
so
great.
do I.
They're not, and people will complain about them. Oh, they're pretty bare bones and they don't do this and that. Well, yeah, I mean, I don't know how much you expect, but for my functionality, where all I need is for somebody to be able to click, select a date, it writes to the field, and I'm off and running. It's great. And I didn't have to import any JavaScript. I mean, that's the whole thing about JavaScript performance, right, Dan? The less JavaScript that you're downloading to your browser, the faster you're going to be.
So actually, well, it's not just about performance. It's also about um, performance is one important aspect. Obviously, the less JavaScript, the better. But in that regard, but it's in general, I'd say that anything that can be done sufficiently well with just HTML and CSS and without JavaScript should be done just with HTML and CSS without JavaScript.
Yeah, leveraging the platform is all you're doing. You're
Leveraging the
leveraging what's
platform,
already
exactly,
there.
exactly. For example, Jake
Now y'all need to
Archibald.
go watch DHH's Rails World keynote from a couple weeks ago, because
Yeah, I know.
this is more or less what he's preaching.
Yeah, I know. I started watching it. There are a few issues, but we'll get to that in a second. I just want to mention that Jake Archibald, for example, recently posted an article in which he talks about various proposals or ideas that they have around styling or stylized drop-down menus that will be built into the platform. So if you want more sophisticated drop-down menus, instead of just the regular unstylable select, fields. So they're working on that sort of thing. And again, once you've got it as part of the platform, it becomes very easy to use it from within any framework. But the thing is, if if it makes the framework code minimal, you start asking yourself, well, what do I need the framework for? Like if my framework stuff is just really thin wrappers around the platform features. Now, obviously, we're not really quite there yet. Obviously, before I get a lot of hate about our our design system does a whole lot more than that. And I get it. It's the same for us, but we're getting there belatedly, probably like 10 years too late in a lot of ways, but we're getting there. And it does make this type of approach, the approach that you're saying that DHH is espousing, a lot more attractive and reasonable. I don't necessarily agree with everything he says. For example, his stance on bundling, it seems he's slightly backtracked. Again, I might be wrong, but off of his extreme stance that you should unbundle everywhere. Now it's more about unbundling during development, which I'm totally cool with. I don't know if he's also opposed to bundling in production. That's still problematic or can be problematic.
And so if we want to get into that, so that's now we're getting into more of the weeds of how Rails works. Of course, it's still using an open standard that you could use in other apps, but the way that Rails works with its components or with its JavaScript stuff is it uses import maps, and so you can use a bundler for a lot of that stuff. I've also seen people adopting the Vite Ruby or Vite Rails gems to get their stuff done, but instead of using import maps. But import maps, the idea is that there's no build step, and so that's the big feature that he's touting, is that you don't have to go and learn Vite, you don't have to go learn Webpack. You don't have to go learn whatever the next bundler is. Effectively, you put your files into the import map, and then you can tell it to preload the ones that you need preloaded, and then you're good to go and off to the races. And I mean, the approach has worked fairly well in every app that I've used, but yeah, you get this list of, and if you're using Stimulus, you basically have an import map entry for every single one of your controllers. But again, it's worked fine on anything that I've worked on in production.
Well,
And
to do a little bit of pedantic devil's advocate here, Veet is one of the things about Veet is that it's pretty plug and play. I mean, you come
Yeah.
in, you said a couple things. It ain't Webpack. That's the thing about Webpack
Yeah.
is the config files, but Veet is pretty plug and play.
Yeah, I've done Veet on a couple of Rails apps, and I think you have to put in a config file, but I mean, you can use the default one.
Yeah,
you
here's
can
my
use the
directories.
default one, and it works
right
pretty much out of the box.
Yep.
Look, we've had people on on the show in the past talking about, like bundling the consequences or not. So obviously, getting rid of a build step, if you can achieve it, is great. It's also obviously totally undoable if you're using a front end framework like React or any other or most of the front end frameworks that require some sort of a build slash compilation step. Um, it also means getting rid of TypeScript unless you're using JSDoc. Um, so that's also a significant consequence. Like, I think we may have spoken about it with Gil Tayar, I think, about the fact that um, if you're doing front end, you're going to be using any of the major frameworks, then you're going to have a build step
Yeah.
regardless, and then you might as well just do all the stuff that leverage all the benefits that it can provide if you're going to have it anyway. I get that DHH really wants to avoid it, and if you can, that's definitely an advantage, but it's advantage that comes at a price. For example, DHH doesn't use TypeScript. He doesn't want to use TypeScript.
Nope, he
But
doesn't. In fact, I have some words to eat on that. So last time when we talked to what's his name? Now I'm drawing a blank. Last week it was Dan, it was you and I.
Tomer Gabel.
Yeah. So I said I don't know if he's directly opposed to static types. I went and watched some of the talks from Rails World. He is definitely not on board with static types. So I will eat those words because I said I didn't know, but it turns out that, yeah, absolutely. He was talking to Toby from Shopify, CEO of Shopify, and Matt's the guy who created Ruby. And they asked him, so if you two could swap places, what would you do? And David said, no static types ever. In Ruby.
I want
You
to
really
hear
shouldn't
the
beat around the
argument.
bush.
I want to hear the argument for dynamic types because I don't get it.
The argument, look, first of all, if you're coming from a inherently dynamic language like Ruby or like JavaScript or like Python, then there's a certain reason you picked that language. There's a certain reason, like DHH is loves working in Ruby, and Ruby is inherently dynamically typed.
Sorry, what I meant was loose types. I like dynamic types. I don't like loose types.
I'm not sure what you mean.
Yeah, me
So
neither.
dynamic typing meaning the types are assigned at runtime. Strict typing meaning that types don't change. Once something's a number, it's a number. So if you like TypeScript is strict typing. The types are still dynamic, but I guess they're not as dynamic as Go. Like Go has dynamic typing. TypeScript is probably less dynamic than Go, but JavaScript
Again, I'm not
can
totally
be
following. Look, TypeScript basically is a layer above JavaScript that gets totally stripped at build slash compile time.
Right.
As we discussed it with Tomer last week. If our listeners are interested in more details about it, but basically TypeScript enforces types at development slash build time. Once you, it has zero impact on the actual generated code. And in this regard, it's different from Go or from Java,
Well,
where the types that you specify actually impact the type of code that gets generated. If you
that's not entirely true though, because if you once you declare an object in JavaScript, if you never delete and you never add an inconsistent property to it, it is optimized as that struct type.
Yeah, there's a lot of optimizations going on. The optimizations are pretty much dependent on the JavaScript engine figuring out that something has a certain type and then optimizing according to that type. But
Yeah.
there's nothing in the language
Yes.
preventing you from
Mhm.
doing something else. In so it's kind of the, it's kind of like an AI like approach of the runtime inferring that something will always be an int and therefore we can put it in an int type, you know, register or whatever, or memory address. But I'll give an example. Okay, in a language like C++, you've got overloading, which means that you can specify the same function, two like implementations of the same function based on the type of argument that it receives. So you can have a function called add, which takes two numbers and returns the sum of the numbers, and you can have a function called add which takes two strings and returns the strings concatenated, and the internal implementation would be different. There would be two different functions, just that are the difference between them is just the types of their arguments. That's not something you can do with JavaScript. And because TypeScript is just like a build layer on top of JavaScript, that's not something you can do in TypeScript either. You understand
Mhm.
what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, I think
Yeah. My
I think when
question
it comes,
was why would it be valuable? In what case would you want something that was a number to now be a string, or
Oh, that's
something that was a string to
I
now
don't
be a number? Why would you want to be
know.
inconsistent in the way that you handle your objects?
Oh, I
And
don't think anybody wants to be inconsistent in the way that they
oh,
handle their objects. What they want is not to have to think about not have to explicitly specify types at development time. Anybody who's, you know, once you have to specify types at development time, sooner or later you're going to have to do generics, and that's just hard. uh, and if you, if you can be more fast and loose with types and rely on duck typing and stuff like that, you don't need to deal with with explicit interfaces. There's a lot of beauty in
that's
that.
the world I
Or
love. Yes.
that's the way Zig is, by the way. Zig is all
Yeah.
duck typed.
So it's interesting too, and I know we've kind of gone off on a tangent, but I don't know that I have a whole lot more to present on Stimulus and Turbo anyway. But I guess the other piece of this is knowing the Ruby community in particular the way that I do. If there was an implementation that gave people some level of benefit, the way that people see benefit from TypeScript, whether it's perceived or real, I think people would adopt it. But the implementations that have come out and the way that they've approached it, it just feels like busy work that you're adding to the system. The
look,
other thing though is that
if I can just
Toby,
interject on that for a second, because from my experience, TypeScript is the value of TypeScript increases as your code size increases,
right?
even not linearly, like exponentially, or at least polynomially. So if your code base size is small, which is kind of the goal with the things that we've been talking about today with
Hmm.
Turbo Drive, with Stimulus, you want to keep your JavaScript kind of minimal, then indeed there's relatively little value or benefit in using TypeScript. Um, and
Yeah.
and that's essentially it. I'm currently seeing a lot of value with TypeScript. I'm putting TypeScript into some large legacy systems at the place where I'm working at Sisense, systems that were built several years ago in just straight on JavaScript, and I'm finding a lot of bugs of uh, uh, people using the wrong field on the wrong object,
Mhm.
um, and and obviously the system worked. JavaScript is really forgiving. You read the wrong thing, you get back undefined, it doesn't crash. That's both good and bad. uh, it that they had tests in place, so things passed tests, but definitely there were bugs in the code. Like I'm saying, that the biggest
Mhm.
challenge for me in adding TypeScript into this code base is dealing with all the bugs that get uncovered.
Yeah. One thing that I was just going to point out, because you started out saying, hey, with the larger code bases it makes sense, and that's effectively so. Toby Lutke, he's the CEO of Shopify, right? He was one
Hmm.
of the initial developers. It's all written in Rails. um they created a type system called Sorbet, and they use it in all of their code. And when DHH spoke up and said, hey, don't ever add static types, Toby pointed out, yeah, I can see where you're coming from. And in a lot of cases, you don't need it. But at Shopify, we have to have it.
I, I'm
And
not
their code
familiar.
base is gigantic.
So I
It's
think
one, yeah.
it seems like the way that everybody would be happy is if we had strong dynamic types. If we had types where once you define an object, if you have a typo somewhere later in the code, that should surface.
Again, that's you're talking about safety at runtime. Uh,
I'm talking all safety is at dev time. There's no such thing as safety at runtime except for like null checks and Java
So
and
what
Go.
you're
But
talking
like there's
about
no
doing static analysis on the code to try to figure out that you're not reassigning a different typed value to the same variable. Like
yeah,
type
which is what yeah,
well that
TypeScript checker can help with that if you just enable it in a JavaScript project. It's not
well
perfect yet, but it's pretty good. And if you want to add something intentionally, if you want to create a polymorphic object, you use object.assign,
yeah,
which
basically
is
TypeScript
idiomatic.
does something called type inference, which basically means it figures out the type of a variable based on, let's say, the initial assignment. And then if you assign something that's incompatible with that type inference, it will complain.
Yeah, this is good. This is like
Yeah.
this seems like the happy medium. Everybody should hopefully be able to be on board with that. Like we want to prevent mistakes. We don't want to add boilerplate and overhead. We want to prevent mistakes. And that's what strong dynamic typing, duck type, strong dynamic duck typing types are.
I will add that, especially when you're developing APIs, whether it be for like you're building a library or you're just working on a complex system that has APIs between different parts of it, and I'm talking about in-code APIs like function calls, not or interfaces, not over-the-wire APIs. Then having static typing, strong typing on that enables the system, even the editor, to help you along and make sure that you're passing in the correct parameters and that you're getting back the correct value is valuable from my experience.
All right. I'm going to push us to picks. I
Don't
mean,
we have anything else to say in the context of turbo and stimulus?
I think we've covered the basics. I mean, there are some other things that you can get into. We didn't talk about like outlets for stimulus, which is effectively how you call methods on one controller instance from another controller instance.
Yeah, those are getting in the weeds.
You're getting
Uh,
way into the weeds, but I mean, it like I said, it's been able to do everything I need. So I've been pretty
I
happy with it.
have read somewhere that that Turbo Drive is also able to leverage WebSockets.
Yes, Turbo Drive can, and so can Stimulus. There's actually a library that was written by some friends of mine that live here in Utah called Stimulus Reflex. There's also a Stimulus, has cable in the name somewhere, that specifically works with action cable and rails. But yeah, I believe both of them work fine with WebSockets. I know Turbo does.
Okay, cool. I guess that's if you're really streaming a lot of data back and forth, it
Mm-hmm.
makes life easier that way.
Yep.
Okay.
All right. Well, let's get to picks. Dan, why don't we start with you?
Put me on the spot. Um, so I've got two picks. First of all, last week my pick was the vacation that we had in Italy, and it occurred to me that the way that we tour places has really changed over the years. Like now when I plan, I like to be planned in my trip because unfortunately we can't take really long trips, which means that we kind of need to be efficient. For example, we move hotels almost every night because we get to some place, we do it without the kids, so it's easier, and we just get to somewhere, and we don't want to need to drive back at the end. So we just keep on driving forward all the time. But it does mean that we change hotels almost every day or two. And so a couple of things. First of all, with things like booking.com or Airbnb or what or all the other various services, it's really easy to find interesting hotels, book your trip in advance. You don't need to think about getting somewhere and starting to look, which might be an interesting experience if you're there for a week, but not really efficient if you're only there for a night. The other way in which technology has kind of shifted the way that we're touring. So obviously, everybody now uses GPS while driving, and it makes driving a lot less stressful. I'm old enough to remember the days of using maps, and the biggest challenge was that if you strayed from your plan, then you were really worried about how you might find your way back. And now with GPS, it's no concern. You don't have to worry about it. You make a wrong turn, it'll get you back on your route. But the interesting thing is that now we do the same thing when we walk around. So what I like to do again, when I know that we'll be in a certain place for a limited amount of time, then I like to kind of check in advance what are the sites that we want to see, the places we want to go. And I do kind of a traveling salesman optimization of finding a good route that goes to all these points, a walking route. And I just have the phone in my pocket with the Google Map and in walking mode. And it just tells me, turn right here, turn left there, and I can just walk around and see the sights and not look like a tourist holding the map, trying to figure out which way is up, and where do I need to go, and whatnot. It's almost like having this kind of a virtual tour guide, and it's actually, once you get used to it, it's a great way to to tour a place, especially again if you've got a more limited amount of time. Because again, if you've got a lot of time, just wander around and experience the sights and sounds and smells and what have you. But again, if you're more limited for time, I found it to be a really efficient way of touring places. So that would be my kind of non-technical pick. My technical pick is a funny kind of joke library that I ran into. It's called, let me quickly find it.
Steve, you taking notes?
Absolutely.
It's
Didn't you
called
notice me perk up right there?
it's called Set Big Timeout. Turns out that set timeout is limited to about almost 25 days, because the timeout duration is specified in milliseconds, and it only uses 32-bit values for that. So that turns out to be something like 24.9 days. And what happens if you want us to set timeout for 40 days or 60 days or half a year or something like that? You can't use set timeout for that. So now you've got set big timeout, which can even take big ints, and you can specify really lengthy durations for your set timeouts if you need it. Sounds really useful to me. Uh, I'm obviously being sarcastic, but it's kind of a joke. Library, it's presented as such. What it does, it actually creates a series of set timeouts. So obviously that's not very accurate, but it's amusing. Let's put it this way. So that would be my second pick, and those are my picks for today.
Awesome. All right, Steve, what are your picks?
Before we get to the high point of the episode, I do have one sort of legit pick, and I touched on it earlier in the episode. I think Inertia.js, their version 2 is out in beta. And so I'll put a link here to the upgrade guide for version 2.0. And it's got some pretty cool stuff. It's polling, prefetching, deferred props, which is sort of like props that don't load right away. You can say, hey, defer this till the page loads. Some infinite scrolling capabilities, and so on. So I'll put the link in the guide in the show notes. It's v2.inertiajs.com. I first heard about it, I think, on Laravel podcast, or seen it coming from the Laravel world. But if you just do some quick Googling, you'll see all kinds of info. Now, for the dad jokes of the week, let's see. So, question. Did you hear about the guy who got a 100% discount on his plastic surgery? The look on his face was priceless.
Nice.
Oh, it's wrong mouse. Sorry. There we go. All right. So what do you call a Spanish guy being discharged from the hospital? Manuel. Although technically, yeah, just don't stretch that too far. And then finally, I was having a conversation with my wife the other day, and I said, hey, I know you're busy, but can you say wonton backwards? She said, not now. I said, that's right.
All right. AJ's laughing. AJ, what are your picks?
For the 15th time, I have to pick The Fall Guy yet again. I got the 4K Blu-ray with the extended cut, and I want to read one of the negative reviews. Chris Palladino says, one of the dumbest movies in a long time. Agreed. Writing was terrible. Agreed. Tried to be cute and referential, but was hack and cliche. Agreed. Plot makes zero sense. Agreed. All over. They mainly just blow a bunch of things up and have over-the-top, unrealistic action sequences. Non-stop. Yes, it's an excellent movie. I don't know how this person, like this, we agree on it, and he only gave it 2 stars. No. It is an action romance comedy, which is kind of, I don't know how many movies I can say have pulled off all 3 things well, but I think this one does great. The plot doesn't make any sense. But I don't know, when's the last time you watched a James Bond movie? Does the plot make any sense in that? I mean, when's the last time you watched a movie where the plot makes sense? This one, there's no nuance to the the good guy, bad guy thing. It's just like the person who has evil motives has straight evil motives. The person who has good motives has straight good motives, whatever. But it's just fun. It is, my wife loved it. I walk away, and one of the positive reviews basically said this. I walk away and I'm like, man, that was such a fun and funny action movie. And my wife walks away with, that was such a fun and funny romance movie. And I don't know how, she and I talked about it the very first time, and did we watch the same movie? Because she's like, oh, the dialogue between her and him was so sweet. And I'm like, no, the part where he's jumping over dumpsters and got the 4x4 going over the ridge. Anyway, so I totally agree. It's a stupid, dumb movie, but it's just so good. It's so good. So The one thing that I will say about the 4K movie is the extended cut is not on the plain Blu-ray. The extended cut is only on the 4K. So I have one of those defective uh, Blu-ray players that happens to accidentally read 4K. It's the LG. Let's see and you can still get these on Amazon, and you can downgrade the firmware. It's the LG WH16N-S40. So it accidentally reads 4K discs, and then they patch it in the firmware that ships currently, but you can downgrade the firmware, and then you can just read 4K discs without any problem whatsoever on it. And,
I can't
yeah.
tell you the last time that I actually held a disc in my hand or a memory key.
That's fine. It's for people that want to have movies next year as well. It's because all these movies are going to get pulled from all the services, and we've already had that happen a few times. Disney has done the vault thing a few times, whatever. But obviously, the digital movies are not going to stick around. Already, what was the service used to be called? Ultraviolet, that went down.
Right.
Like the entire service went down.
No,
Everybody
the
had their
concept
collection
of
there.
owning the concept of owning your media, that's really strange.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, but I run Plex, and all of the best movies we have, the Super Mario movie, all that, it's all on Plex. So anyway, other
AJ,
thing that I was
before you
gonna,
move on, AJ, did you ever see the TV show, the original TV show, The Fall Guy?
I watched one of the episodes, and it does not seem to be in any way related to this movie.
No, it's not related.
Okay, so for what it's worth, two of the main characters had cameos in your movie.
Yeah. I know one at the end. Like one, I could tell by the camera angle and the guy's smile. I could tell, like, okay, this is a reference to something. I just don't get it. And then I found out that it was Lee Majors.
Right. And then
appears at
Heather
the end.
Thomas was also in the original TV show. Apparently
Yeah,
she made a
we-
cameo as well. For
For
any of
some
you
reason,
who are too young to remember Lee Majors, he was probably more well known as the $6 Million Man.
Mhm.
yeah,
Okay.
that's really funny because these days you can't buy anything with just $6 million.
Yeah, no
You
kidding.
know, if they were to do that show again, it would have to be like the $6 trillion man.
Yeah, there you go. Right.
Yeah, this Blu-ray player was,
About
At
$6 million.
yeah. Anyway,
Yeah.
the other thing I was going to pick is passkeys. So WebAuthn has had a very sad history, and there's a lot of backwards compatibility that people try to keep that makes it really complicated. And over some work that I've done, I have found that if you just focus on the passkeys aspect, the baseline stuff that works everywhere, basically it's just a fancy replacement for a password manager. And not, there's not really any extra security than that, because essentially trusted platform computing, I think they were thinking it was going to take off when they made the WebAuthn spec, and then reality of physics and the physical world we live in hit, and we know that that just can't happen. It's physically not possible. But anyway, so if you just focus on the baseline passkeys, you can have a really good experience. And I got a demo up on passkeys.js.org. And then third thing, not a pick, just a question. If anybody has experienced vertigo for multiple days in a row, please comment or tweet at me with if you've had success with some sort of solution. Let me know, because I am now on 4 days straight of 24/7 feeling dizzy. I don't know why, and I cannot find a remedy to it, and it's making life difficult, as you can imagine, if you felt dizzy
I
4 days straight.
I would check if you don't have some problem in your ear canal or something.
Yeah, that's I'm gonna go see someone about doing the Epley maneuver, which is supposed to, if the crystal gets dislodged, it's supposed to you move your head in certain ways and you get the fluid back. But yeah, I'm 4 days into I don't know why I'm feeling like I basically I feel like I have the flu, but only in the sense of dizziness and disorientation.
You might want to see an ear doctor or something. Maybe you've got some sort of inflammation or something. I don't know.
Yeah, but it's yeah, I'm gonna try a few things and then take that route if I can find someone that'll get me in this week.
Yeah.
Because it's very frustrating, and I'm having a hard time focusing because the world feels swimmy.
Yeah, with my mom, it's interesting you're talking about this because it was literally this weekend. My mom had similar issues, and it got so bad that they went to the emergency room. But apparently, hers gets aggravated if she lays on one side versus the other when she's sleeping, and I don't know that they
Yeah,
really gave her anything that would help.
yeah. Probably she creates a vacuum or something in one
Yeah.
ear, and that causes a problem
Yeah.
or something.
I wonder if maybe it wasn't when I was riding my motorcycle without earplugs the other day. I don't think that was it though, because sometimes I just could do a short ride without earplugs because it's just nice to feel the full sensation and everything. But usually I have earplugs, and then sometimes when I take the earplugs out, I kind of pop them, because they they're jammed in there with the earwax and everything. You pull them out and they're like pop, and I try to twist them so it's not so dramatic. But I don't know, maybe it was one of those things. But I can't pinpoint when it started happening. It just, I think it was Thursday night or Friday morning. I just noticed I was a little dizzy, and then I thought, oh, whatever, it'll go away, and then it hasn't.
Oh, sorry to interrupt after I finish my picks, but I just saw a really amusing headline. I just remembered that I saw it. Um, can you guess what the total global debt is in the world in dollars?
I'm gonna guess 150 trillion.
317 trillion.
That's more than the GDPs of all the nations combined, isn't it?
I, I don't know, but I would guess so.
That's good. That's a good place to be.
Yeah.
We're not headed for economic collapse. This is fine.
Yeah, it says as of 2022, the global GDP amounted to over 100 trillion. So,
good. So we're only
a whole bunch
in
over the next. Yeah,
2 times. How is that possible? I mean,
3 times.
That's
Because
Anyway.
we don't need to print the money anymore. It used to be gold, then it used to be printed money. Now it's just digits in a computer.
right. All right, I'm going to go ahead and throw in some picks. I'm also, when I'm done with this call, I'm going to go downstairs and tell my kids that Dad feels dizzy and that they need to be quiet and leave me alone for a little. I'm just going to lay here on the couch and quietly watch a show. You all need to leave. Anyway, yeah, so picks, games, my things have been kind of nuts. In lieu of a game pick, I'm just going to put out there, so my latest contract, they unexpectedly lost a customer, one of their bigger customers, and so then they unexpectedly let all of their contractors go. So if you are looking for somebody who can help you with, I'm into the stimulus turbo stuff or Rails if you have a Rails system. Obviously I'm qualified on that. I'm also getting into AI, like chatbot agent stuff, and so if you're looking at that, let me know. I'm yeah, and then I think I'm just going to do the other stuff, like my stuff picks, instead of whatever else stuff picks. So javascriptgeniuses.com. What I'm looking to do is put together a group of people who are interested in kind of pushing each other to stay current and learn new things and stuff like that in the JavaScript space. And so if you go there, I'm running, it's the same deal I've had, and I'm going to keep it up until Black Friday. It's $39 a month. There's also yearly and lifetime options. If you want to join the group, we have weekly calls. We do accountability calls on Monday and Friday. Monday is here's what I'm going to do. Friday is what you did. And then, we as a group will help you stay on top of and accountable on the stuff that's going to get you where you want to go. And it could be, I just want to learn more JavaScript stuff or get better at React. Or it could be, I want to speak at more conferences or write a book or start a podcast or whatever related to JavaScript. All comers welcome. It also includes the book club. And I'm going to be putting out videos on how to do stuff. I'm probably going to start with Remix on the JavaScript series. So if you're interested in any of that stuff, you're definitely welcome to join in. I'm also doing it for Ruby, and I'm eventually going to start one for AI. The other one is with the AI stuff that I am picking up. I'm going to be doing an AI bootcamp next year. It's going to start in January. So if
That
you're
sounds really
interested,
cool.
I will have a website up for that here within the next day or so you can go sign up or jump on a call with me and we can discuss whether or not it's a good fit for you. Because honestly, I want everybody who goes through the boot camp to come out of it and go, I'm set up to do this. And, I know what the next steps are to, either go find work or add this to what I'm doing at work with it. So if I don't think you're going to get that out of it, I won't sell it to you. So anyway, yeah, that's pretty much the stuff I've got going on. As far as movies go, dumb movies, I'll just throw this one in. So, and I don't know what possessed me to do it, but I started watching the Transformers movies, like starting with
Oh
the
no,
Transformers.
that's less than dumb. That's less than dumb. It's like negative IQ stuff, man.
They're
No, it makes total sense that an alien culture would build a robot that looks like a Dune buggy.
no, they're yeah, anyway.
No, it's just they ruined it with the soft core and all that, and the Romeo and Juliet laws, the pedo stuff. Like it's so
Anyway, it's nice, mindless entertainment. So, anyway, I've watched the first 3. I'll probably get around to watching the rest of them. But anyway, those are my picks. I made AJ cry.
Yeah, okay. So I'm gonna pick that you get yourself on the Pirate Bay and hit up the original Transformers, the one where the Transformers are actually the good guys rather than just anti-heroes that are a different set of bad than the bad guys.
What's the original Transformers? The first movie?
Like the cartoons?
The
Yeah, the cartoons. It's like Captain Planet, G.I. Joe, Ninja
I
Turtles.
watched the cartoons when I was a kid.
Yeah, I like in the cartoons the Transformers are actually good guys. In the movies, they're anti-heroes. There's like Optimus Prime is mostly good, but the other ones are literally just gangsters.
Okay.
I'm laughing.
It's like Bloods
wrong.
versus
Anyway.
Crips.
Okay, I don't care.
Yeah. Anyway, let's just go ahead and wrap it up.
Oh.
If you all want to reach out to me about Stimulus or Turbo or anything else related to that, I am totally open to that. Twitter, CMaxW. You can email me, chuck@topenddevs.com. And till next time, Max out.
Adios.
Bye.
I am interested in your AI